Hello, my name is Dr. Sergio Patricio. Today is September 26th of 2025. I'm presenting my idea in the Symposium of Dance Resonance Artistic Attunement in Motion. The title of my presentation is Embodying Radical Care. Radical care is a critical intervention, a redefinition of care as embodied, urgent, and political force that challenge passivity in favor of active, context-responsive social transformation. Radical care is fundamentally about movement, it's an action in motion, relational practice awake to the urgencies of our time, whether social, ecological, or material. We refuse the closure of care within the boundaries of already privileged cycles and aims to resonate through borders communities provoking a shared accountability for justice, equity, and collective well-being. Three influential thinkers. Edward Glissant's notion of relation invites us to see identity and community as processes in flux, generated through ongoing exchange and encounter. Glissant suggests that relation does not act upon a prime element that are separable or reducible. This resonates with the very spirit of radical care as a dynamic, mutual constitutive force. Atmos process resonance further refines this, emphasizing our capacity to be moved and changed in our encounters with the world and with one another. Rosa writes resonance describes a way of relating in which individuals are touched, mobilized, or emotional moved, entering into a responsive resonant mode of being, as opposed to the silence, control, and alienated relations that characterize routine modern life. For radical care, this vibration is not metaphorical, it is the very somatic preamble of communities awakened together to justice and hope. Yuriko Saito's philosophy of aesthetics of care reveals the inseparability of ethics and aesthetics, underscoring the political urgency of responsibility and attentiveness. The notion of care offers a site where the ethical and aesthetic are integrated and deeply entrenched in the management of our daily life. It defines the way in which we relate to the other, whether the humans, non-humans nature, or the artifactal world situates ourselves in the world. Moreover, Kera's performance testified the risk that morality, without an aesthetic sensibility, may degenerate into a mere rational decision science. Geographies of care. The radical quality of radical care becomes most evident when we examine the uneven geographies of care between the global north and south. In the global north, structures of support, artistic funding, and institutional care frameworks are taken for granted, often allowing artists and communities to focus on questions of access, inclusion, and representation. The radical quality of radical care becomes most evident when we examine the unbeing geographies of care between the global north and south. In the global north, the structures of support, artistic funding, and institutional care frameworks are taken for granted, often allowing artists and communities to focus on questions of access, inclusion, and representation. Yet in the global south, radical care takes an urgent survivalist characters forged in conditions of scarcity, systematic violence, and colonial residue. Here, new forms of solidarity and mutual aid arise, not as luxuries, but as necessities. Artistic practices invent networks, publics, and futures in response to state violence, neoliberal exploitation, and ongoing struggle for recognitions and rights. In the ongoing North-South conversation, radical care is not the same everywhere, and this difference in both a challenge and a generative force. Milligan and Weiss introduced the concept of landscapes of care to better understand how care is spatially and culturally situated across diverse environments. This process is necessarily relational, as it includes ongoing responsibilities and commitment to the object or subject of care. Within the broader geographies of care, this framework invites us to rethink territorial distinctions such as those between global north and global south as a complex relational landscapes where care practices are shaped by differing cultural, institutional, and environment context. Caregivers do not simply do things for people. They also support them with encouragement, personal attention, and communication in ways that endorse a mutual sense of identity and self-worth. It is important to recognize the thoroughly special ways care, structure, and practice landscapes of care build healing properties and cultural geographies intrinsic to therapeutic landscapes. So, radical care in action. As I present examples, I invite you to look closely at the images that accompany them, for this embody the flow and tension of radical care in action. And the North companies such as Graeae Theatre in the UK exemplify how care can become infrastructural, not supplementary. The performances are constructed around what they would call aesthetics of access, integrating sign languages, audio description, and full participation of disabled and not disabled artists at every stage. In Graeae's world, care is not an extra, it's a rehearsal of justice, a dismantle of ableist assumptions, a shared responsibility to make art experience truly collective. Similarly, Anna Halprin planetary dance, first developed in California in 1980, models care as a collective ritual. The dance is a participatory community-based event, a mandala of moving bodies joining a shared purpose, enacting peace, ecological awareness, and healing. In Halprin's vision, the body is always a site of possible transformation. Care is a collective gesture, alive in every synchronized step. Turning now to Rimini Protokoll, a German collective practicing what they term documentary and participatory theater, we witness radical care as the redistribution of narrative power. Rather than hiring professional actors, productions feature experts of every day, non-actors whose lives experience centers marginalized stories, social issues, and hidden dependencies. Their work desestabilizes the distinctions between performance and audience and foreground the politics who get to be visible, who get to speak and be heard. Moving to Raw Matters, an artist-run initiative in Vienna, we encounter Radical Care as a platform for risk, experimentation, and collective support. This collective offers time, residencies, and structured peer exchange, insisting care is the scaffolding that enables vulnerability and innovation. Everyone, regardless of disciplinary background or notoriety, is invited to test ideas, make mistakes, and contribute to a communal sense of belonging. Raw matter, therefore, expanded the notion of radical care from the individual or duo to the ecosystem, attending not only to people but to the creative processes, spatial dynamics, and models of peer learning. These novel models were inspired largely exist within the context where care is resources and institutionally supported. As we look to Global South, the flow of radical care takes different forms. In Chile, the artist Paula Aros, public at the center, transforms everyday urban space into an open laboratory for care. Ordinary citizens, rather than trained performers, becomes both observers and co-creators, dissolving boundaries between audience and action. In an environment where privatization and surveillance threaten the commons, Aro deploys testimonies, digital media, and bodily presence to create fleeting but powerful songs of mutual attention and solidarity. Francisco Bagnara's Dance from the Future used participatory choreography to enact hope during social political crisis. Here, movement is speculative. Participants are invited to dance not their present predicament for the future, they wish to ensemble together. In this enactment, radical care becomes an imaginative force, mobilizing precarious communities into cooperative forward-looking constellations. Another subtle example, the globally influential Chilean feminist collective Las Tesis transformed the street into a stage for collective protest and healing. With Un violador en tu camino or A rapist in your path, choreography, chant, and solidarity becomes tools for public redress. The performance pictured during the wave of the social rebellion known as the estallido social, or social outburst, quickly went viral, resonating with women and marginalized genders across borders. Las Tesis show the radical care is also fierce. It means transforming range and trauma into a meshwork of support, visibility, and practical hope. In all these southern practices, radical care is not guaranteed by resources or policy. It is carried out against the grain, often through protest, reclamation of space, and the work of imagination that refuse despair. The flow from the north to south is not merely directional. Care circulates, is translated, adapted, and reinvented within the living stories and the power differentials that structure them. The examples also remind us that the fluidity radical care, its ability to cross frontier, is part of its power. Raw matters, for example, is not only a modern phenomenon but a model for how risk, experimentation, and mutual aid can be practiced anywhere artists or communities gather. Rimini Protocol, too, builds participatory theaters can be adapted for different settings, challenging us to think how radical care can be embedded in diverse institutions and geographies. Graeae Theatres and Las Tesis, for their part, demonstrate how politics of access or feminist protest can become tools for community formation, challenging every audience to expand both the limits and responsibility of solidarity. These collectives create an ecology of care, a term to map interconnections between body, disciplines, spaces, and stories, and an invitation to practice radical care as both local and planetary necessity. The same resonance is found in mass social movements, such as the woke movement in the United States or in Chile, the social outburst, where care takes the form of public protest, mutual aid, and solidarity across lines of difference, including the Black Arts Movement in the 60s and 70s, led by the artist Amir Baraka, emphasized Black empowerment through politically engaged art that connect cultural expression with social struggles. In both cases, bodies gather in the street not only to resist injustice, but to care for one another openly. The human microphone, the linking of arms, the collective protections against state violence. These movements makes visible what radical care looks like at scale, when it radiates from art into a daily practice, politics, and lived history. The concept of an ecology of radical care expanded from the individual life of care to see it as a complex interconnected system. It views radical care not as an isolated practice, but as a dynamic force that operates between and transforms various social, political, and environmental spheres. Glissant's idea of relation, the interconnectedness of all people and cultures, and Rosa, resonance, which offer a way to understand the alienation of modern life, both illustrate how theory can inform artistic approach rather than determining content. This concept can be used structurally to shape grassroots movements, focusing on building genuine, responsive connections and radical care among people. Flows between the Global North and Global South represent a two-way exchange of practices and ideas. These movements are crucial for decolonizing care, showing how methodologies and philosophies travel across geographical and cultural boundaries, challenging a one-directional flow of knowledge. The flow also extends to and from peripheral elements like grassroots protests and mutual aid networks. This connection shows how radical care emerged as a response to systemic issues and how these acts, in turn, sustain the broader social ecology. The central flow, the vibratory current, is the core of the ecology. It represents the content's reciprocal energy of care that links all nodes. This current is not just a transfer of information, but an active transformative force that shape and is shaped by every element in the system. How artistic expressions of radical care, such performance by Las Tesis, can grow and transform into broader social movements. Embodiment is central to understanding radical care as a practice deeply rooted in materiality and rationality. Drawing on theories of effect and posthumanism, embodiment challenge fixed biological or essentialist notion of the body. Instead, viewing bodies as a fluid, composed, and interconnected with their environment and social world. This view emphasizes bodies not entirely as physical vessels, but as a site of affective intensities, cultural politics, and lived experience. Importantly, embodiment critiques humanist assumptions that they have historically excluded and marginalized racialized and queer bodies, revealing the limits of a universal human categories. Radical care through this lens becomes a practice of attuning to complex and situated realities of diverse bodies, affirming vulnerability and connection as a source of knowledge and resistance. This understanding grounds radical care firmly in the ethics of a presence and responsibility that moves beyond abstractions, focuses on the embodied, effective relations that sustain collective life and social transformation. Radical embodiment, as developed by David Nichol in 2010, refers to an epistemology and anthropology fundamentally rooted in our bodies as always in correlation with natural and social environments. It seeks a philosophical reconciliation of body, mind, and spirit, grounded in moderate postmodern theology. While Nichols in 2010 radical embodiments offer a metaphysical reconciliation of body, mind, and spirit, my study diverged from this path. Instead of adopting his more abstract and universal ontological position, I prioritized situated socially and politically engaged approaches to care that emphasize embodied, affective, and context-specific practices, particularly attentive to disparities and resistance in the global North and South. In the view, we can see the radical embodiment presented by Nicole in 2010, and my study then presenting the embodied radical care. There has a little difference between some aspect as a philosophical grounding, as a focus, an ontological position, and key aim, and conceptualization and practical expressions. Embodied radical care, as presented here, diverge fundamentally from David Nichols' concept of radical embodiment. Whereas Nichols' framework aims at the metaphysical reconciliation of mind, body, and spirit, my focus centered on the direct, relational, and collective enactment of care as a situated embodied practice, manifested through movements, protests, vulnerability, and accountability. This distinction is critical. Radical care does not operate as an abstract ontological position, but as an urgent, affective commitment responsive to social and ecological urgencies. It foregrounds care as an embodied lived process that sustains transformative connections, enable continued resistance, and supportive collective care. By emphasizing diverse practice across the global North and South, this perspective highlights how embodiment in radical care is always situated within a specific cultural and political context, revealing the vibratory relationality of communities in motion. Embodying radical care is thus a dynamic constellation, a practice continuously shaped by collective resonance, emerging through the attunement and celebration of social movements, gender diversity, and shared futures in arts and beyond. Thank you.